Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenour, and we've got an incredible episode in store for everyone listening today. Hope you all had an enjoyable week at work and are ready to relax, get comfortable, kick your feet up, and enjoy the weekend. You can tell it's playoff baseball time when the weather really starts to change, and man, has it gotten colder and colder. I feel like each day here in Pittsburgh, it keeps getting cooler, and I am not a big cold weather person, so be prepared to hear me complain quite a bit about the weather. But anyways, we have a really jam-packed episode ahead of us today with the World Series now in full swing. I'll get into a little recap of the first game and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I'll first get into a discussion on Game 7s in both the ALCS and the NLCS, and recapping those two incredible games. I'll also mention the recap of the Braves and Dodgers Game 6 battle that happened on Saturday that ultimately pushed the series into 7 games. After that, I'll give a little look ahead into the World Series. I will also recap the first game of the Fall Classic from Tuesday, October 20th, and mention some things that stuck out to me and some of the top performers after Game 1 as well. Some really good performances on the Dodgers end. I don't want to give too much away, but some really, really good stuff in that Game 1 matchup. I'll then transition out of that conversation into addressing different teams' offseason needs and improvements that they need to make if they want to find themselves in a better spot for next year, and maybe even mention some free agents that teams should or could go after in this offseason. And be sure to stick around for the final few minutes here today on the GSMC Baseball Podcast, as I will rank the greatest late-round draft picks in MLB history and mention the careers they had and the rounds they were selected in. So be sure to stay right here with us on the GSMC Baseball Podcast for that fantastic final segment. So getting into the recap of the Game 6s and 7s, well, really only one Game 6, but in both Game 7s, because there was some really good stuff in this Rays-Astros battle. So I'm going to jump into it right now. And getting into it, first striking is the Tampa Bay Rays. And again, this is going back on Saturday, October 17th. So a couple days ago, about a week ago or so when this comes out. Again, I'm pre-recording this, so when this does come out on Saturday, this will be probably a week ago. And again, Rays came out swinging first as they were able to score the first 2 runs of the game in the bottom of the first, and then in the bottom of the second, they also tacked on a run as well. So it's 3-0 going into the third, and then the third, fourth, and fifth innings were all scoreless for both teams. Going into the bottom of the 6th inning, the Tampa Bay Rays put on another run, so now it's 4-0 going further into the game. And then getting into the top of the 8th inning, that is when Houston would put on 2 runs. They made a little bit of noise. They started knocking at the door a little bit, but the Rays did not answer, and they were able to win and ultimately push themselves into their second ever World Series appearance, and the Rays won 4-2 in that final decision. So a great series. I know it started out very slow for the Astros, a 3-0 deficit that they were in, and then all of a sudden winning 3 straight games, and things really, seemed to, take a turn for the worse for the Rays. I mean, you could tell it was kind of a turning of the tide for that series and kind of between these two teams, but Tampa really controlled the tempo of that Game 7 from the start, I think, personally, but, jumping out ahead with 3 quick runs, that is what they're going to do, and that's what they're going to need to do, because they couldn't afford to have the Astros strike first, because if that would have happened, this may have turned into a totally different outcome. The Rays are 32-6 this year, both in the regular season and in the playoffs when they score first. So that right there, 32-6 in almost 40 games, you're winning. I'm not doing the math in front of me right now, but probably close to 90% of your games when you score first. So again, that was really needed for them in order to give them a kind of a little cushion for their pitchers to work with, because really that is what's been the difference maker, is this pitching. It's not really been the hitting, and this pitching has really held together very, very well, and it's just a matter of if the hitting can also fall in place. And honestly, they only needed a run or two to give Morton some room to work with, like I mentioned, because Morton is a monster in do-or-die games, as he moved to 4-0 in the decisive game matchups that he pitches in, and he's the perfect guy you want to have on the mound with a slim lead, because he will keep runs, at bay, and really keep runs being scored at a minimum. Now, I have to give credit to Lance McCullers. He did some really good stuff, had some solid pitching outings. He had a 7K outing in Game 7, and then earlier in the series and earlier in the playoffs, he actually fanned 11 batters, but still picked up the loss. So just unfortunate he didn't have the run support, but good for the Rays winning. I mean, this was one of the lowest, if not the lowest payroll team in baseball. And I actually saw something that is very interesting, that this year alone, Garrett Cole is actually making more money himself than the entire Tampa Bay Rays starting lineup in the postseason is, which I think is absolutely crazy. I mean, Cole is making roughly $13 million a year, and the Rays starting lineup was just under $9 million, with around 8.8 or so, which is staggering. I mean, they are marching on, and Cole is at home. And again, I think that's what's great about this this playoffs this year, because of everything that went on, the pandemic, the labor negotiations, everything else. I think that it really kind of was a nice icing on the cake at the end right now, because a small payroll team, a team that is usually not in this position, not this far along in the playoffs, and has really kind of shown that it doesn't necessarily take star power. You don't need, a heavy, deep lineup like the Dodgers. And again, that does work, and that method definitely does seem to, be working out in, great favor for the Los Angeles Dodgers and a lot of other teams. But the Rays have now shown that you don't have to be a major market team to go this deep. You don't need to have 3 or 4 superstars that are getting paid $30, $35, $40 million a year. You can go about it on a low payroll, and you can get, a great result from that. And I think that they're showing that, and they're really, I think, going to pave the way for other smaller market teams, especially if they win this World Series. I think that would be huge, just to show that, these smaller, not as larger market teams and not as larger, city teams are still able to hold their own against big, large markets like LA or New York, and they're able to take them down and win. But regardless, this was a fun series to watch. I'm very excited to see how the Rays fare in the World Series, because I'd love to see them win it all. And honestly, it would go with the theme of 2020, having the unsung hero in Tampa Bay winning the Fall Classic. Now, getting into my top performers from Game 7 of the Rays and Astros series, Randy Arozarena, 1 for 4 with 2 RBIs, a homer. He was also the ALCS MVP. He was actually the first rookie to win the award in either a championship or a World Series. So congratulations to Randy Arozarena. G-Man Choi was 2 for 3. Jose Altuve had another 2 for 4 outing, so he actually hit very well in the series for the most part. I mean, there was really no complaints from him. I mean, there was at least 3 games that I know of that he hit at least at least 500 from the plate in that game. And then Carlos Correa, he was 1 for 4 with 2 RBIs, and again, the Astros have been sent packing home, not having to deal with them anymore, and now we've come down to the final 2. But before I get into that, I want to now jump into a little recap of the Dodgers versus Braves Game 6 matchup that was even better. I mean, this was a really, really good one. So jumping into it, LA struck first with scoring 3 runs in the bottom of the first, but then it was scoreless the rest of the way. I mean, Max Fried really settled down after giving up some home runs and some big, big hits in that first inning. And it was Walker Buehler against Max Fried, so a really good pitching battle between those two. It was scoreless through the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th innings before Atlanta was able to tack on a run of their own, and they were ultimately they ultimately fell to the Dodgers 3-1 because there was no more scores after that 7th inning. So again, this Dodgers team really kind of turned the Jets on at the right time, and you could tell that, even though the Braves were up 3-1, you almost kind of knew it was too good to be true. You knew that something was going to happen, something was going to occur, and this would not be the way that the Dodgers would go out. And as we know now, clearly was not the way they were going to go out. So a really good game, but the Dodgers, again, they stayed hot in this one, but they didn't churn out the runs that they usually do. They only put up 3 total runs in that first inning, so it was definitely a bit of a grind out win for LA. The Dodgers were part of the 20% of teams who have been down 3-1 in any best-of-7 series to ultimately come all the way back and force a Game 7. So what they did was very, very challenging to do. I mean, when you are in that hole and you are facing elimination game after game after game, that wears on you, not only physically, but also just mentally, knowing that, okay, whatever I do is going to have a really lasting impact, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, because this is a do-or-die moment for us. We're either going home or we're advancing forward. There is no other way of looking at it. So I think that builds the pressure up, and it definitely heightens the moment up a little bit. But, I mean, it should be, because this is Championship Series baseball. This is World Series baseball. This isn't a regular season game in the middle of July. This is a very, very impactful game. Now, I'll get into the Game 7 recap in a minute, but of that 20% of teams, which is 17 teams, 13 of them have won that deciding Game 7. So history was definitely on the side of the Dodgers. Now, the Braves definitely had their opportunity to score. They had the bases loaded on Buehler in the top of the second inning, and somehow they didn't generate a single run. And honestly, that was Atlanta's issue for most of the series, I think. I feel they didn't capitalize when they should have. They had many opportunities to. Another instance I will get into in the Game 7 recap is the poor decision-making on the base path. I think it was just simple mistakes that were being made, and the Dodgers were able to take advantage of those miscues. And there was numerous times where, you're stranding runners after runners after runners in each and every single inning. And I was talking to a friend of mine the other day about this, because the Rays also have this tendency to do this, and I don't know why. But they'll get runners on base consistently each and every single inning. But the problem is they don't drive those runners in. And this was the Braves' issue. The Braves really kind of got into a little bit of a lull trying to drive in those runners, because they were getting guys on base. And it wasn't necessarily a matter of can they keep up with the Dodgers pitching, but really, can they just drive runs in? Can they get the ball out of the infield, and whether it's through a sac fly or getting just a little bloop single, whatever it might be, a big double, a huge home run, they were not capitalizing when they should have. And that, I think, was ultimately their downfall in this series. Buehler is a great option to throw when it comes to do-or-die elimination games. I mean, he's been sensational, as he actually tied a Dodgers record for being the second pitcher, second to Clayton Kershaw, to have his third career postseason start with at least 6 scoreless innings. So Walker Buehler is a pretty lethal option when it comes to playoff baseball. The bullpen did step up big when he came out and he exited the game, only letting up 1 run, and going into Game 7, they really put the pressure on the Braves. Now, getting into some top performers from Game 6, Corey Seager was 1 for 4 with 1 RBI, 1 homer. Austin Barnes was 2 for 3. Cody Bellinger was 1 for 3, 1 RBI. He actually played much better in these playoffs, but especially in this series. I mean, he came up big, not only offensively, but defensively too. Him and Mookie Betts, I mean, they look like an incredible tandem out in the outfield. Travis d'Arnaud, he was 2 for 4. He also had a really, really good series. Again, although the Braves did not move on, and I don't mean to jump the gun there with the Game 7 recap, but although the Braves have been sent home, d'Arnaud had a really good, really good series. He had a really good playoffs. So to say that the Braves should not be pleased with what they've done this year, I think is a little bit of an understatement. I mean, I think that they should be. I think that they should be very pleased with how things kind of turned out. Obviously, not the way they wanted to, and obviously not in the fashion that it happened, blowing a 3-1 lead. But they still think that, it's. I think it was for the most part, a great season for Atlanta. And then Dansby Swanson also 3 for 4, and then Ronald Acuna Jr. was 1 for 4 with 1 RBI. So some really good performances from some guys in Game 6. Now getting into Game 7, and this was even better than Game 6, obviously, but Game 7 was an intense one. Getting into the recap, Atlanta actually was the first team to scoring in both the first inning and the second inning. They scored a run apiece in each of those innings. Then getting into the bottom third, the Dodgers scored 2, so they tied it up in the bottom of the third inning. Atlanta would then answer with another run scored in the top of the fourth, so it would go 3-2, scoreless in the fifth inning. Getting into the sixth inning now, the Dodgers would score 1 run in the bottom of the sixth, and then ultimately the go-ahead run by Cody Bellinger, an absolute moon rocket of a homer that he hit in the bottom of the seventh inning. And when that ball made contact with that bat, you knew it was gone. I mean, you could just tell by the way that the sound that it made on his bat, the reaction that he had, the reaction from the pitcher, the reaction from really everybody. I mean, he absolutely let that thing fly. And again, that was the go-ahead there. There was no run scored in the 8th or the 9th inning, and the Dodgers would ultimately win the series and come back from 3-1. Talk about an improbable comeback. And again, when I'm going to get into in my second segment with the World Series, they've continued that trend. They're on a little 4-game winning streak right now, and that is a little bit of a sign that this Dodgers team is not playing around. They are not going to take no for an answer. They feel like they've been cheated and they've been robbed of a World Series. They also feel like they've underperformed in another World Series. So they want their redemption, and I think they're going to be, this is going to be their year. But the Rays are a tough team. They are a tough team. Now, Game 7, I mean, what a game this was. Back and forth, but close the whole way. Julio Urias also pitched very well, picking up the win and going the longest out of any Dodgers pitcher, going 3 total innings, not allowing a single run. But I have to give credit to Dustin May. Yeah, he only went 1 inning, and he did give up a run and 2 walks. But he's been really good for them all year, and in these playoffs, I mean, especially as a rookie, but man, some big-time plays from Mookie Betts out in the outfield. He's pretty much saved about, I would say, 4 to 5 runs, give or take, himself between the multiple home run robs he's had and having a fielder that gets it done at the plate also. That's a dangerous thing to have on a team. And Cody Bellinger has also been great in the outfield for them, some big-time plays by him. Also, that was a huge factor in their win, not only in Game 6, but also Game 7. And I look back and think about the few hard-hit balls off of the Braves' bats the last few games, and they were deep drives, and I mean deep, where you are sitting there thinking, it's out of here, it's gone. And then one of the Dodgers outfielders just saves the day and pulls down a huge catch to save numerous runs. So some big plays that were crucial for them down the stretch. But the real head-scratcher for me, that again, looking back, was completely game-changing, was the base-running hiccup the Braves had. So with runners on first and second, no outs, this is in Game 7, they advanced the runners on a wild throw or a pass ball, one of the two, I can't really remember exactly, but there was a ground ball hit to the third baseman. So Justin Turner scoops it up, and remember, there's no force out at first. There's a guy at second, and there's a guy at third. So the runners don't have to advance. There's no outs. There's no need for them to run, especially when it's a pulled hit ground ball onto the third baseman side, close to home plate, an easy throw from third to home, not like it's a really hard hit ball towards the edge of the grass, towards the shortstop or the second baseman. This was right to Justin Turner, and he was playing pretty close up, I would say. So again, runners at second and third would usually stay put to remain in scoring position, but for whatever reason, they decided to run on contact, which is another head-scratcher, and the guy at third makes a beeline for home, gets caught in a rundown and tagged out by Justin Turner, who made an unbelievable diving tag. Then the guy at second is tagged out at third, so in about 30 seconds, they went from having runners on the pond, ducks on the pond, runners on second and third and no outs, to now having a man on first and 2 outs. So a big change in scenario in a matter of a minute. Ultimately, the Braves dropped the ball, and the Dodgers made the miraculous comeback. First time a team has come back from being down 3-1 to win win the series since 2016, when the Cubs were down 3-1 to the Indians. But a huge win for LA and a disappointing loss for the Braves. But again, their overall season shouldn't be marked as that because they have had a much better year this season than they've had in 20-plus years almost. So definitely something to look back on with hope, but not satisfaction, because they know now they can play with the best of the best. And the addition of Ozuna, this is going to be a good team, I think, in coming years. Now, congratulations to the Dodgers. Now they are in they've done a phenomenal job. This is going to be a great Fall Classic. They're now in the Fall Classic playing, only the 4th time where the 2 best teams in the 2 separate respective leagues made it all the way to the World Series. The last time this happened in 2013. And again, this year, the Raids, they had the best overall record in the AL, and the Dodgers, same thing in the NL, best overall record. And so again, 4th time this has ever happened where they meet up in the World Series. So pretty cool. I mean, it kind of, again, goes along with the theme of all of the record-breaking and, kind of new records being set and everything else. It kind of goes with that trend that's been following this playoffs for the most part, I think. Now, getting into my top performers from Game 7, Will Smith went 1 for 4 with 2 RBIs. Cody Bellinger, he was 1 for 2 with 1 RBI. He had the go-ahead homer. Kiki Hernandez, 1 for 2 with 1 RBI. And then Marcell Ozuna, he went 1 for 4 with an RBI. And Dansby Swanson was 1 for 3 with 1 RBI. I'd have to give Dansby Swanson a lot of credit. In Game 6, he was 3 for 4. He went 1 for 3 in Game 7. So, for the most part, you can't complain. I mean, that's some pretty solid hitting right there from Dansby Swanson. Somebody who has not really done a whole lot in the last few years hitting-wise. He's steadily improved, but again, I don't think having the career that I think everyone painted it out to be. Not quite yet. He's still pretty young. But again, congratulations to the Dodgers, and it's going to be a really, really good Fall Classic. So that'll do it for us in this first segment, but stay right there, folks, because after the commercial, I'm going to give my look ahead to the World Series, and I will give a breakdown of Game 1 of the Fall Classic between the Rays and the Dodgers. Folks, stay right there. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer with you all, and in our first segment, I got right into a breakdown of the Game 7 in the ALCS and the NLCS, and I mentioned the Game 6 matchup in the NLCS as well. Be sure to stick around for the final segment today where I will discuss the greatest late-round draft picks that would go on to have incredible and illustrious careers. I want to now get into a look ahead and a little preview into the World Series and give a recap of the Game 1 matchup in the Fall Classic. So jumping into Game 1 of the World Series, Rays versus Dodgers, this is it, everybody. This is for all of the marbles. This is for everything. Jumping into it, scoreless through the first 3 innings, so 0-0 all the way up until the bottom of the 4th when the Dodgers struck first, and that was really the beginning to the end of Game 1 for the Rays. Scored 2 in the bottom of the 4th. The Rays did tack on 1 run at the top of the 5th, so it was 2-1 going into the bottom 5th, and the bottom 5th is where the bats really woke up for the Dodgers. 4 runs in that bottom 5th inning. It's 6-1 going into the 6th inning. They tack on 2 more runs in the bottom 6th inning, and then now that's 8-1. The Rays were able to put on a little bit of an offensive charge in the top of the 7th inning, putting on 2 runs there, but that just wasn't enough. That was not enough for them. And ultimately, the Dodgers did win 8-3. It was a really good first 3 innings. I mean, Glasnow came out very strong, very, very strong. He did have a couple control issues in the beginning, couple fastballs in the dirt, but settled down very well. And I will have to say, the bullpen comparison, and this is just a little side note, and I'm going to get into the bullpen even more, but before the game, they compared the bullpens between the two teams, the Rays and the Dodgers, and this kind of goes back to the point of how well this Rays team has been, and I'm going to bring this point back in a little bit. They're virtually the same team in regards to their statistics for the bullpen. The Rays bullpen had a 3.40 ERA, while the Dodgers had a 3.41 ERA. The Rays and Dodgers have also the same amount of Ks from the bullpen, but the Rays do have 25 walks versus the Dodgers 18, so identical numbers for the most part. Rays do allow just a smidge more of runners on base, but other than that, I mean, they are very, very similar. Now, the hitting eventually got to Glasnow, and that was the problem. And personally, I think that Kevin Cash left him in a little bit too long. I think that, he started to get, 1 run scored on him, 2 runs scored on him. It kind of started to pile up, really. And I'm personally looking at it like this, okay? If Glasnow is able to get out of that before, if they go to the bullpen before, it really starts to snowball, which it kind of did. So they take him out earlier than they probably would have, or what they did on, Game 1. They take him out, they go to the bullpen a little bit earlier. What they're doing now is, A, they do have a trustworthy bullpen that has been very good all postseason long, and B, Glasnow can now go and pitch on short rest. He can come out of the bullpen in another game that might have, been a really close one down the road or whatever it might be. He would be able to come into a game and pick up a potential, scoreless inning or scoreless 2 or 3 innings that they might need from a starter that day, and then going into their, real deep into the relief. They might need that kind of in-between guy, and being able to have a starting pitcher that can come in and just pitch really, strong, efficient 2 or 3 inning outing, that's huge. I mean, that is huge. So, personally, I'm not sure why Cash left him in there that long after he started surrendering runs, but, for the first part of the outing, he definitely had a great showing of his fastball, and he does have, a limited arsenal in his pitching repertoire of what he can throw. It's really only a fastball and a curveball, but if he can add that 3rd and 4th pitch, wow, that would be a game changer for him. Now, speaking of game changers, Bellinger once again with another incredible grab in the outfield. The defense for the Dodgers has been top-notch, and the Rays too, but I feel like the Dodgers, as of recently, have really seemed locked in, and they don't want to lose to anybody, and certainly not the Rays, so I feel like they want to silence the hitting and really come geared up for Game 2. Kershaw actually passed John Smoltz. It's a little fun fact. for second all-time in career strikeouts in the postseason, with just over 200, as he is the second pitcher now to Justin Verlander to ever eclipse that 200 mark. So now he's moved up the list to second all-time in most career strikeouts in the postseason, and he's the second ever pitcher to make the 200 club. So again, a huge milestone for Kershaw. But if the Dodgers were to run into any issues with a comeback by the Rays, you toss in Kershaw at any point in time, and you should be good. Although his career ERA in the World Series is a 5.40, he definitely showed up to pick up a huge opening series win for the Dodgers. And if he can stay healthy, if his back can stay, intact, this is going to be a doozy for the Rays, because, again, they're going to have that weapon of Kershaw being able to come out of the pen or, come in and give a really solid outing starting-wise. Those bats really woke up for the Dodgers, and that is the danger of L.A. The Rays don't really have that, and I feel like the Rays need to chip away at games, whereas the Dodgers can just explode for 5 or 6 runs in the bottom or top half of the inning and totally separate themselves and really, kind of give a little bit of a cushion on a lead and really give some, separate themselves from their opponent. Now, I think that, it's two totally different offenses, but I think the Rays can bounce back in Game 2. But with the Dodgers, they looked really good, and it will be a toss-up, but I think that ultimately if the Rays, pounce on them first and they're able to score first, I think that's going to really set the tone for Game 2. And, this could turn out to be a very interesting back-and-forth series. So some of my top performers for Game 1, Mookie Betts was 2 for 4 with 1 RBI. Max Muncy was 2 for 4 with 2 RBIs. Chris Taylor was 2 for 3 with 1 RBI. And then Kevin Kiermaier was 2 for 3 with 2 RBIs. So, again, very limited offense for the Rays, and that is going to be a big issue. Now, looking into this series and looking into this World Series, the Dodgers are going to be hungry the whole time. They know they were cheated out of a World Series in 2017. They really dropped the ball in 2018 against the Red Sox. And then last year, you could tell they just didn't have what it takes to take that, or they didn't have what it took to take down the Nationals. They were pretty, and the Nationals, I will give them credit at that point last year, they were playing pretty inspiring baseball. But again, the Dodgers did not come to play. They did not show up in the fashion that they are used to. But they want to take advantage of this time right now, and they don't want to assume, that they can just walk all over the the Rays, because they can't. The Tampa Bay Rays are going to give them they're a very defensive-minded team, and going up against one of the top offensive teams, it's going to be an offense versus defense battle. And I think that if this Rays pitching can really shut down the Dodgers hitting, I think it's going to pose a little bit of an issue. The Rays have been the best team in the AL all year long. They've been getting some ginormous help from rookie sensation Randy Arozarena. Manuel Margot has also been playing very well. G-Man Choi and Mike Zunino have also been playing great. In fact, actually, Zunino is a home run shy, or 2 home runs shy, of tying the record for most home runs by a catcher in the postseason, and Arozarena is 1 homer away from tying the MLB postseason record for most homers in a single postseason with 8. He's currently sitting at 7, so this team has done considerable damage while they've been in the playoffs. The Dodgers, however, are coming off a huge come-from-behind series win, while the Rays did allow the Astros right back into the series just to take Game 7 away from them. So the Dodgers definitely have a little bit more of the momentum on their side. They've won 3 in a row, well, actually dating back to the World Series Game 1. They've won now 4 in a row. So they're on a little bit of a roll right now, but Tampa has shown the ability to step up when needed, and having Glasnow, Morton, and Snell to throw in the first 3 games, that's going to be a heck of a matchup in Games 2 and 3 between Morton and Snell, and the bullpen that has been highly touted during this postseason as well. So, again, between those 2 pitchers going in Game 2 and Game 3, Snell is going in Game 2, that's going to be crucial that they can try and come out with at least 1 win, because if they go down 3-0 to the Dodgers, they can pretty much kiss their World Series winning hopes goodbye, because there's no chance that you're going to come back from being down 3-0 to the Dodgers. But what I am going to keep looking out for is this battle between the LA Stars. The Betts has been doing, what I'm really looking forward to is, and what I'm really paying attention to, is the batting and the bats in the lineup from these Los Angeles Stars and some of the best players on the team. Betts has been doing great hitting and fielding-wise, but Bellinger has been hot and cold from the plate. Although his Game 7 heroics were the reason why they probably made it to the World Series, I am curious to see how Bellinger is going to fare against this pitching from the Rays. We've seen them work out of jams and also move efficiently through innings. Again, I go back to the point of Peter Fairbanks being in a bases-loaded jam in the ALDS against the Yankees. He had, I think, no outs, and it was bases loaded, and he was able to work himself out of that bases loaded jam with no outs, and it did not allow 1 score in that inning. So they can put themselves into a little bit of a sticky situation, but they seem to always find a way out of it. But this LA team is not as forgiving, I think, as, not only the Yankees, but also the Astros. And, I mean, the Astros, looking back at that ALCS, they were stranding runners on the base path left and right, similar to the Rays, but the Rays pitching was just a smidge better, and that was really the difference. Because, and again, the Astros, for the most part, are a team that are going to drive in runs. Same with the Yankees. So the Rays have now gone up against 3 teams that know how to drive in runs on a consistent basis. They should have a general idea of how to play against teams like that. And this dangerous lineup that the Dodgers have, it's going to be a battle of phenomenal pitching and phenomenal hitting. It's going to be that Rays pitching versus that Dodgers hitting. It's not necessarily going to be the hitting or the pitching on either opposing side. It's going to be that Rays pitching and how they can fare and limit that Dodgers hitting, and whether or not that Dodgers hitting can generate any sort of offense against a very strong, not only starting rotation, but also bullpen that Tampa Bay has. Now, like I mentioned in the NLCS, the catchers, I think, will be X factors because Will Smith and Mike Zunino have been batting very well, and having that added dimension to their respective lineups of a catcher who, you can do some damage towards the bottom part of the lineup. Not a lot of teams have that, and being able to have that secret weapon kind of in that 7, 8, 9 spot in the lineup, that's a really big thing to have. Now, Will Smith has been struggling some batting-wise. He's only hitting .222 right now, but don't let that fool you because he can do a lot of damage, and he can have a major impact in this series. He's already had a 5 for 6, plate outing or hitting outing a couple games ago. I think it was in the NLDS, if not the NLCS, one of the two. But that's been pretty much the chunk of his hits this postseason, but he's capable of going on a tear in one game from the plate. The one issue I think will be in this is how will the Rays pitching stack up against the batting of the Dodgers. The Dodgers, again, have, as we all know, a serious lineup. And not to mention, besides Betts and Bellinger hitting well, they've had some massive production from the NLCS MVP, Corey Seager, who I swear every time I am watching their game, I'm not sure if it just so happens when, that when I'm watching he goes yard, but I feel like every time I've seen some sort of, plate appearance by him, I see some serious plate production from him. And he definitely showed that in the NLCS. The pitching is also going to be interesting to watch for the most part. Yes, the Rays hitting, which besides, Arozarena would be hitting below 200 as a team. And against the Rays forefront pitching being led by Walker Buehler and Clayton Kershaw, I think that's going to be, another kind of interesting dynamic to watch. Can the Dodgers pitching live up to that expectation? And can Arozarena put this entire hitting on his back, and can other guys step up too? That's going to be another thing, is can we get some guys on the Rays to really step up from the plate? Now, although Kershaw has pitched well in the postseason, he has already been scratched from one start that they ultimately lost because most likely of the pitching, so his health could come into question, and if it does, this Rays team could definitely take advantage of that. However, this is a Rays team that is leading the playoffs in home runs, and they actually have hit 7 more homers than the Dodgers have. So right now, the power hitting seems to favor the Rays, but the consistency of that hitting, it really lies in the hands of Arozarena. He's been the main focus of the offense for them, and if the Dodgers can shut him down, then this Tampa team could have some serious hitting issues. But look to see players like Kevin Kiermaier, Willy Adames, or even Austin Meadows, and then obviously Brandon Lau, who I think who has been incredibly disappointing in these playoffs. I mean, he had a pretty solid season. I mean, it steadily declined each and every single week and each and every single month, but these playoffs have been the most disappointing part of his season. And his season has really, like I said, taken a turn for the worse, but maybe he can have the same result that Bellinger did when he entered the playoffs and start playing a little bit better. That could happen for Lau if he can step up to, in the biggest stage possible. But all in all, I think it's going to, this is going to really come down to the Rays hitting against the Dodgers pitching, and that's what I'm most interested in, because the Rays pitching has been top-notch, and same with the Dodgers hitting. But I think this Rays team will be challenged by the pitching, and, will have to really prove to everyone that they can go up against that, this stellar pitching of the Dodgers. But also, I was also talking about it with a couple friends of mine. The Dodgers pitching, if you look at their pitching, really, yes, Julio Urias is very good, and so is Walker Buehler. But in terms of an ace and somebody that has been dominating, or at least has been dominant, Clayton Kershaw is really your only option, in my opinion. I mean, you got the rookie, Gonsolin. He's got a 9 ERA or above a 9 ERA, so clearly not doing it for them. Over on the Rays side, again, you've got Charlie Morton, you've got Tyler Glasnow, and you've got Blake Snell, that you can at least rely on those three. You've got Castillo, you've got Fairbanks, John Curtis. You've got some good guys coming out of the bullpen. Yes, the bullpen did get rocked around a little bit in Game 1 of the World Series, but if they can come back and settle down, and if that starting pitching can limit any runs, and again, it really is going to, I think, secretly, and again, I know I've talked about the pitching from the Rays and the hitting from the Dodgers. That's going to be the battle to watch, and that's going to be the thing to watch. But really kind of the misnomer, and I think, again, like I mentioned briefly in the beginning of this segment, if the Rays can score first, and if you can get them, if they can get on board and get on the scoreboard before the Dodgers do, and just let the pitching do their thing, that's when they're smooth sailing. But it's when they allow a 4 or 5 run outing in a half inning that things really start to go south for them and things really start to sour. So I think that we're going to start seeing a little bit more of the hitting try and, bubble up a little bit and see if guys can step up to the plate. Literally, no pun intended, really actually try and step up to the plate and do some damage. So we'll have to see. But it's going to be, like I keep mentioning, a great World Series. I'm excited for it. I'm going to be tuning into all the games. So it'll be a blast to watch. So that will close things out here for us in our second segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. Coming up after the commercial break, I'll mention different teams' needs that they need to address in the offseason and what kind of direction some franchises might go in terms of players to add to their roster. Folks, it's been a lot of fun so far, but we got a lot more to go, so don't change that channel. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Great to have you all still here with me today. Jack Ridenauer again, and we just wrapped up going into a little preview of the World Series and also a recap of the first game of the World Series as well. I want to now get into some teams, the off-season needs that they need to fill and how they might go about adding certain pieces to their team this off-season. So a lot of teams on my list. I'm going to mention, again, not going to go through all the teams in the league, all 30 teams, but I'm definitely going to highlight a couple that I think are either on the cusp or they made the playoffs, but they're kind of those floater teams that you could see making some noise here in the next couple years, depending on how these next couple free agency off seasons really kind of play out for them. So the first team I want to talk about, the Baltimore Orioles, and what I think that they really need to focus on and what they really need to address is the pitching. And this team has started to show, again, a steady sign of improving the hitting with acquiring some solid minor league prospects and also the steady emergence of Hanser Alberto, who batted .283, had 3 home runs. He also had a .306 on-base percentage and a .698 OPS. So again, not a great power guy, more of a contact guy, but he's getting on base and he's being able to set himself up for scoring opportunities for these other big-time hitters in this lineup. Renato Nunez, he batted .256. Now he's one of these big-time offensive production guys that really drive in runs, 12 homers, 31 RBIs, and .816 OPS. And then also Anthony Santander, he batted .261 with 11 homers and 32 RBIs, .890 OPS. So they've clearly started to show signs of really quality hitting, but the pitching is what needs to be addressed. They had the 16th lowest ERA in the MLB with a 4.51 ERA, and they clearly didn't have power pitching either, as they were 25th in the league out of 30 teams in team Ks. So this past season was really not a great one for their pitching rotation at all. They were tied with the 4th most losses as a team with 35. And their relief pitching had a lot to do with those losses, as they accounted for 13 of the losses, which was one below the season average. the league average. So they lost one of their top relievers during the trade deadline in Mikael Givens, who was having a very good year, a really, really solid outing for them. But like I said, they added 2 very promising prospects from the Rockies. They really need to address the relief pitching, because they led the league in inherited runs last year, so they are leaving a lot of guys on the base path in between relief men, and that is a big problem. When your relief pitcher comes in and gives up more runs than the guy before him might have, you clearly, you're not doing your job, and you're not doing it very well, and not doing the proper, job of holding teams in late innings as an in-between, middle reliever, and allowing for a lot of runs to be scored possibly. Now, although they leave a lot of guys on the base path, and they do a nice job of minimizing runs actually being scored, because they actually had, with the league average in inherited run scoring percentage, basically, again, the percentage in which the runners score that were inherited runners by the pitcher. So how often those inherited runs are basically scored. That's basically what the stat is. And they do a nice job of minimizing that. I mean, they were right at the league average of that, and I can't remember what it was. I think it was around 39 or so percent, something, nothing astronomical, but nothing incredible. I mean, again, middle of the road, but it's a sign that they are at least doing a decent job of limiting those runs that are scored after the previous pitcher goes out. So they're coming in and pretty much picking, kind of cleaning up the guy before his mess a little bit, kind of in a roundabout way, if you will. But for the most part, if you're able to have pitchers that can do that, and that they are able to get out of already set up, bases loaded jams, or men on first and second jams, or men on second and third jams, whatever they might be, if they're able to get themselves out of those sticky situations, then again, that's a pretty good sign of your relief, bullpen and your relief pitching. But the fact that they had, almost a third of their losses, just about roughly or so, coming from the bullpen, that's also not a great sign. So definitely bullpen, pitching, I think could be, potential for them to kind of bolster and look at. So who I think they could target, they could definitely target Shane Green. He had a really good season this past year. And then Brad Hand also had a very good season as well. So somebody else that could be, a possible option for them, those 2 pitchers, I think that they could be very good pieces for them. Now, my next team that I think, could really address a lot of things in the offseason, the Toronto Blue Jays. And again, the same thing with them. They need to address the pitching. The Blue Jays added some pitching at the deadline, picking up Robbie Ray and Taijuan Walker, but, Walker he had a very good year initially with the Mariners. At least he had 25 Ks in 27 innings. He had a 4 ERA, so not the greatest, especially as a relief guy. He did have an 107 ERA plus, so that was he had a solid season for the most part. Now, Robbie Ray, on the other hand, had a very poor year. I mean, he had an ERA upwards of an 8 ERA, and they've clearly not been the strongest team with the starting pitching, as they actually ranked 17th in team ERA and team Ks, but they also ranked near dead last in quality starts by starting pitchers. They only had 11. So again, a quality pitching outing, I believe, is when a pitcher goes at least either 5 innings or at least 6 innings, one of the two. I think it's 6 innings. So any outing that is 6 innings or longer by a pitcher is considered a quality start, and they only had 11. So guys aren't going deep into games often, meaning that they have to go to their relief pitching earlier than usual, but the relief pitching was pretty solid. They had 22 wins on the year, which was 3rd in the league, and I think that the starting pitching is, what needs to be addressed mainly. Not necessarily the bullpen, but the starting pitching. They clearly have some solid relief pitching. If they can re-sign Walker, I think that'll set them up very well. They definitely need to try everything that they can to keep him around. They didn't have one pitcher throw a complete game either this year, and they ranked dead last in both wins and losses in games started. So their pitchers aren't going deep into games enough to even pick up losses. So that is a problem. If they're having to rely more so on their relief, and that they're starting pitching, and again, if that's a sign that every time that the game is being handed to the relief pitching, basically, not all the time, but basically, there's usually, a runner on base, or that there's been a couple runs scored and somebody's, starting to get tired and they need to come in and take him out. So they're kind of at a deficit when they come into pitch. And again, that kind of adds to, you're really kind of digging yourself out of a hole there. Now, even though they do have solid starting pitching with Hyun Jin Ryu and Chase Anderson, I think that they could add a third piece in that rotation that can really make the difference between the Jays getting bounced out of the first round of the playoffs versus advancing further into the postseason. Who I think that they could target? Adam Wainwright and Kevin Gausman. I think Wainwright would be a really good one for them. He's a kind of an aging superstar, somebody that has been around the block many times. Pretty sure he had a couple complete games, if not led the majors in complete games, one of the two. And being able to have a starter that is capable of doing that, and you're going to have to go after starters that are very durable and that can go long and can go, further into games. They've got great stamina because, again, if your quality starts are at 11 in the entire season, your starting pitching is not coming out strong, and it's a constant theme. So I think that the starting pitching definitely needs to be addressed by the Blue Jays. Now, my next team, the Minnesota Twins. I mean, the thing that they really need to address is more hitting besides Cruz. The Twins have one of the best 35 and older, hitters in baseball in the 40-year-old Nelson Cruz. But after that, their hitting really dipped down incredibly, with the second-best batter in the lineup being Jorge Polanco at a .258 average. Cruz led the team with .303, but again, that's just about a 50-point drop from first to second place. That's a big difference. This is an issue for a team that is usually a pretty good team. They had an unfortunate ending to the season with losing their 18th straight playoff game in franchise history, and the hitting has really suffered at the third base position. I think that's what they really need to hone in on. The two main third basemen for the Twins hit under .220 each all year in Mike Gonzalez and Miguel Sano. And Sano, being a major piece in their lineup in the past, that's not a great sign. He's really kind of taken a turn for the worse. I mean, you look at his numbers, and they've progressively gotten worse. With the 18th ranked batting average in the league as a team this year, they clearly weren't getting on base enough also, as they also had the 20th ranked team OBP, but with the 6th most team home runs, they definitely have counterbalanced that with having really good power hitting, but they might need to add a piece at third that they can not only bring in hits, but also can knock in runs and hit for power as well. Somebody that I think would be a really good target for them is Jake Lamb. I think that he had an R8 season this past year. He batted around 267, 270, somewhere in that general ballpark. He was with, I believe, he eventually got picked up by the Diamondbacks. If not, he was with the A's. He was out west somewhere. And I think that he would be a really good piece for them. He's a solid glove. He's a former All-Star, so he's capable of being a top-tier player. And I think if they're able to get him for cheap, too, I mean, he wouldn't be somebody that would, probably sign for an astronomical amount of money. But I think that if they can bring in somebody like Jake Lamb, somebody that's got a solid glove and a solid bat, that can really bolster that third base, hot corner for them, especially if Sano's not doing it for them. I mean, he batted near the Mendoza line all year long. And, it's only... At some point, Nelson Cruz is going to retire, and at some point, it's going to run out, and they're going to have nobody to really back them up with that. I mean, Mitch Kepler, their catcher, he had an all-right season. Max Kepler. I'm sorry, I get him and Mitch Garver confused. I don't know why I did that, but Max Kepler, he's somebody that batted around 228, 230 all year long. So another guy that the batting can't dip down 50 points from first to second, and I think that's going to be something that they need to address in the offseason. My next team that I think could really, do some sort of damage and really, kind of make some noise in this offseason if they make these moves is the Detroit Tigers, and they really need to bolster their outfield hitting. They were just in the top half of the league in team batting average with a .245%, right at 15th, and they were one of the worst power hitting teams, and they had a terrible hitting outfield, with 2 of the 3 outfielders hitting sub 200 all year long. Victor Reyes did a really great job filling in at center when Jacoby Jones went down. And Jacoby Jones was a big part of their team. I mean, at one point or another, he was leading them in slugging percentage, batting average, OPS. He was really doing it all for them. But now they need to address the weak hitting from the left field and right field positions. Having Scoop in the lineup this year was a big surprise in terms of how well he played, because he also stepped up big when Jones went down. He was batting upwards of 300 at one point of the year. But in this offseason, they need to target some left field or right field free agents, because they need to fill those spots with legitimate hitters that can actually, and at least provide some offense. So some players that they could target that I think would be really great additions: Adam Eaton in right field and Robbie Grossman at left field. Eaton would be, I think, a steal, because I think you could also get him for cheap, especially for a Detroit Tigers team that doesn't have a ginormous payroll. You can get him for cheap. He's played well for the most part for the last couple of years. He's been injury-ridden here and there, but he's a fast outfielder. He's a fast base runner. He's got a pretty good bat. And if you stick him in a leadoff role or in that 2-hole role, I think that you will be very pleasantly surprised with what he will do. Being someone who's a native of Washington, D.C., I have watched a lot of Nationals baseball. And seeing Adam Eaton in the lineup has gotten, I've become accustomed to that, and I've started to notice he's a perfect leadoff guy. He's not going to be somebody that's going to be an MVP or, a constant all-star, maybe a couple years here and there. But what he does great is he's very consistent. He's going to do a lot more good than harm, and he's going to be consistent with it. He's going to be a great fielder. He's going to be a fast fielder. He's going to be, like I said, the speed is a big thing with him. And the fact that, a lefty at bat, that's what you got to love too. And so having him in the lineup, I think, would be really crucial for them. And it would definitely bring up the hitting in the outfield because Jones can't do it all. And having Victor Reyes to come off the bench for them is great. But again, I think they're going to need to fill that hole in the outfield. Next team, the San Francisco Giants, is another team that I think could address a lot of pitching issues, but most of the pitching needs to be addressed in terms of the closer. And the closing needs to be looked at seriously and in depth. This is a big one they need to fill because Trevor Gott had an alarmingly high ERA for a closer with a 10.03 ERA, and he only had 4 saves. And it's clear that he definitely allowed a lot of runs in the amount of time he played, with 13 earned runs in the 11 2/3 innings he pitched. Now, they were tied for 4th in most blown saves in baseball, and they had one of the lowest save percentages all year. So clearly, this is a position they need to target and really focus on. It is no wonder they're not able to win any ball games when the guy that you send in to shut down the opponent in the final inning is letting up every and all home run, double, single, any sort of runs, and allowing teams back into the game. Because you clearly can't expect to win with a closer who hasn't been displaying that ability to shut down teams late in games and really pull out key victories. The bullpen pitching overall, though, the relief pitching in particular, they had the 6th most wins in relief this year. So it's clear that after the relief pitching exits, there is something off about the closing because the starting's all right, the relief gets in, and they do a nice job. They do a phenomenal job at holding teams, keeping teams at bay, but then the closing, that's where there's a little bit of a, lost translation. Now, there's going to be a number of good closers on the market this free agency, so it'll be fascinating to see if they go after any sort of closer that can add some depth in their bullpen. Now, who I think they could target? Trevor Rosenthal. I think that he's had a phenomenal year, both in Kansas City and in San Diego. I mean, he wasn't even near a 1 ERA at one point or another. And then Sean Doolittle. I think although Doolittle is getting older, he's, in his lower 30s. I believe he's around 34 right now. And he didn't have a great year for the Nationals. I also think that he could be somebody that they could target. And again, they could get him for cheap. And that's the big thing. If you can squeeze out 2 or 3 really good years out of these older veterans that have played well before, and you can get them for cheap, that's really kind of, I think, the difference maker with some of these teams that are able to build in-house homegrown talent in their farm system and then go out and get the added pieces that they need. And then the last guy, who I think is one of the more underrated closers, is Mark Melancon. I think Melancon is a phenomenal pitcher. I think he's done a really nice job. He did a nice job for the Braves this year. But I think that those are kind of some options that they could go after, because if they want to make any sort of, competitiveness in the West, an actual thing, they need to bring up that pitching, and because the hitting has been okay. They got Donovan Solano, they've got Mike Yastrzemski, they've got some guys that are good hitters, but it's going to be the pitching, I think, that it's going to really, what it's going to boil down to. So my last team to really pay attention to in this free agency frenzy and kind of what, they might need to address, is the St. Louis Cardinals, and they need to address, again, very similar to the Detroit Tigers, the outfield hitting. And again, this is another team that for the most part struggled batting-wise with a team average of .234 and a .694 team OPS. But more importantly, it was from the left field position that they really struggled. The entire outfield did not hit well as a group, with none of the 3 outfielders hitting above .250 on the year. So clearly the hitting in the outfield needs to be fixed, and Tyler O'Neill is really the main culprit in all of this. Their left fielder, he hit a dismal 173 from the plate all year long. Sure, he's a great fielder. He's very fast. He's very athletic. But if you're not getting it done from the plate as an outfielder, there's only so much you can do to keep your job if you're a fielder, I feel. You've got to be able to produce some sort of offense. They didn't have the greatest year, and they did have to battle a COVID-19 outbreak, but they managed to get into the playoffs before ultimately losing to the Padres. As we know, they went up 1-0, and the Padres won 2 in a row in the wild card round. They were one of the worst teams this year in creating runs, and they almost ranked last in a lot of major power hitting categories. So not only adding hitting, but more importantly, power hitting to their outfield, I think can bring more help to this roster that looked depleted this last year. They really did. Only Goldschmidt was the only one above 300 in their lineup all year long. And they didn't have anyone else batting higher than 265 other than that. So overall, the hitting needs to improve, more specifically the outfield hitting, and a couple guys I think they could go after, and this might seem a little crazy, Michael Brantley, And then there's also Jurickson Profar. I think that Michael Brantley would bring a lot of depth to their lineup. I think that having him there, especially in the outfield, in the left field position, I think that this could really kind of change a couple things around for them that could put them back into the winning, mindset that they should be and that they've been in before. The other thing is they're also aging. You can tell Matt Carpenter's getting old. Yadier Molina's getting old. I feel like Paul DeJong's been there forever. Colton Wong, I feel like he's been there forever. So guys are starting to get old, and, obviously Paul Goldschmidt, I mean, he's no spring chicken either. He's not getting any younger. So I think that they need to go after some youthful hitting, and I know Brantley's not youthful, but as time goes on, if you can just turn him into, maybe a DH eventually, and again, that's going to also factor in a lot this year. If the DH is going to be universal, that's going to change how a lot of these teams go out and find free agents and find new pieces to their team. But I think overall it's going to be a very interesting offseason. A lot of options these teams have, but just a few things I think that they really need to focus on. And a few of these teams were just barely in the playoffs, and some had hot starts and eventually fizzled out. So I think with the right moves, these teams can really build on this past year and improve for next year's season. So that'll do it for this segment, folks. Thanks for sticking around as always, but stay right there. We'll be right back after this commercial break for the final segment today, where I will get into highlighting the greatest late-round draft picks to ever play in the league and what kind of careers they had after entering the league. Don't go anywhere, everyone, because we have one last segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup final.
Listen now.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for the final segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer still with you, and in the third segment, I got right into a highlighting of some of the teams that have, really some of the major issues to address in the offseason and what those holes might be that they need to fill. I want to now wrap up the show discussing the greatest late-round draft picks in MLB history and where they wound up and the careers they had in their time as professional baseball players. So a lot of very well-known names on this list. I think a lot of people might be shocked by how late these players went and who they might be. So the first guy, John Smoltz. I mean, John Smoltz, as we all know, is one of the greatest pitchers ever, and specifically in the 90s, when he had an unbelievable run for the Atlanta Braves, where he was part of a few World Series runs, won a Cy Young, was an 8-time All-Star, and numerous other accolades and accomplishments, including becoming the only pitcher to ever have at least 200 career wins and 100 career saves. This is the wild thing about him, though. He was an All-Star as both a closer and a starter, and he had a stretch of 3 years, from 2002 to 2004, where he collected at least 40 or more saves, with 1 year registering 55 actually, and leading the league in that category. So going from dominating one side of pitching and starting to going to the other side and dominating in closing and relief pitching, that shows the versatility as a pitcher that you have to be able to do that. Some of his strikeout numbers were ridiculous, where for a stretch of 2 years, he had over 200 Ks on the year, and he had that 2-year stretch of 200-plus Ks on 2 separate occasions as well. So clearly he had a lot of success getting guys out. Now, Smoltz was part of a deadly trio of pitchers from the Braves in the 90s, with him, Greg Maddux, and Tommy Glavine, but his journey to stardom with the Braves was by route of a very late draft pick. Smoltz was initially drafted by the Detroit Tigers in none other than the 22nd round. Yes, the 22nd round, a future Hall of Famer that had an unbelievable run during the 90s and early 2000s, but he eventually made his way into a big league uniform and is now the color commentator on Fox for the playoffs with him and Joe Buck, two great voices for sports, and having a career like he did to be taken in the 22nd round, I'm sure many teams are annoyed to this day that they passed up on him. So my next player, that I think was an unbelievable baseball player and such a late draft pick, Mike Piazza. Arguably one of the latest draft picks in the history of the draft. and especially one of the latest to have the career that he did, Piazza was a one-of-a-kind player, a catcher who could hit the living daylight out of the ball. As a 12-time All-Star and 10-time Silver Slugger, which is the record for most Silver Sluggers by a catcher in history, and looking at Piazza's numbers, and he was a guy who would have flourished in today's game. Just simply looking at his OPS plus numbers that are absolutely astounding. He would easily rank among the top 10 or so in OPS plus if he were still playing, and he had a string of years where he had 150 or higher OPS plus, with the highest being 185, which led the league. That's incredible. Talk about power, and especially from coming from a guy that is behind the dish, a great catcher. That is something that you don't see very often. And in 11 of his 16 seasons, he had a 900 OPS or higher, not to mention numerous 30-plus home run seasons and 100-plus RBI seasons. The kick here, though, about where he got drafted, the 62nd round by the Dodgers. And if I'm not mistaken, he was selected because I think his dad, I'm pretty sure, he knew Tommy Lasorda pretty well and convinced him to draft him, which if you think about it, it's pretty incredible because an outside person like Piazza's dad convincing a coach on what to do, that is almost unheard of in professional sports. But that 62nd round draft pick truly became one of the best hitters during that time and really could be the greatest hitting catcher of all time too. But regardless, he's one of the top players to ever get drafted that late. And a lot of these guys, if you think about it, they would be getting drafted in a point where, those rounds don't exist anymore, right? Those rounds are not a thing anymore because of the shortening and the shrinking of the draft. Now it's only 5 rounds instead of 40. So a lot of these guys on this list, in theory, if they were to be playing today, they would not have a crack at the MLB at all. So that's even another thing to put into perspective. A lot of these guys, they might not even be names that we know of if these rules that they're now implementing for the MLB had been implemented many years ago. So the next guy on my list that is an incredible late-round draft pick, Jeff Kent, one of the greatest hitting second basemen to ever play the game. He was actually a 20-round steal by the Toronto Blue Jays. Kent enjoyed many successful seasons over a 17-year career, being named to 5 All-Star teams and also putting together 9 straight years of 20-plus homers. He also had 6 straight seasons of at least 100 RBIs, so a very good hitter to say the least. His career high in batting average for a season was .334, and he was a 4-time Silver Slugger. But his fielding was not the greatest, and it really seemed to set him back a little bit, but his hitting was so superior, I think it outweighed the poor fielding. He had 3 top 10 finishes in the MVP voting, and, fun fact, he actually won the MVP in 2000, which was a career year for him where he hit that career high in batting average at .334. He also belted 33 homers and 125 RBIs, with a career high in OPS at 1.021 as well. So clearly, the year of Jeff Kent was in 2000. And he was also the only second baseman to ever have 100 or more RBIs in 6 straight seasons. So an incredible record, an incredible feat to have. And it was clear the hitting was the separating factor in his career. I mean, the glove, not great, but it was definitely the hitting that made him, talked about. And he was also, a lot of people say he was a huge second baseman. So somebody that you could relate to today, DJ LeMahieu, perfect example. 2 very good hitters. Now I think LeMahieu has a little bit of a better glove, but a great, 2 great hitting second basemen, taller. Kent was about 6'1", 185, and LeMahieu's probably 6'4". I mean, he's a tall guy. So, and kind of that, unconventional tall second baseman, something that you don't see very much in MLB, but he has not received the Hall of Fame voting, that most would expect that he should receive. Unlike Smoltz and Piazza, Kent is not in the Hall of Fame, but did receive the highest voter percentage he's ever received this past year, where he had 27.5% of the vote. If he had not played in an era when steroids ran rampant, and what was interesting about him was he was incredibly outspoken about the usage of steroids in the league, and he was not the favorite of a lot of teammates that had, kind of different speculations about whether or not steroids were being used. He was very outspoken against Barry Bonds when he was with the Giants, and there was actually a couple instances where they got into it, where they physically, there was an altercation between the two. So clearly, he wasn't a guy that. He wasn't a great. I mean, he was a good teammate, but he wasn't making the greatest friends in the world. He wasn't making great friendships with guys on his team. He wasn't a guy that, I think that a lot of teammates might have, done a whole lot with outside of baseball. I mean, I think it probably was just more so of a, hey, he's on my team, and that's about it. And, I mean, it clearly showed. I'm pretty sure Andy Pettitte was also very outspoken against him, too, just with how, much of a outspoken person he was about steroids. And, I mean, it makes sense. Those guys that were, not fans of his, they were two very big steroid user names. But his numbers, again, speak for themselves. Clearly one of the best power-hitting second basemen of all time. He definitely would get a vote in my book for the Hall of Fame if I, had anything to say about that. And one day, if and when I can, vote for the Hall of Fame, I mean, by that time, Jeff Kent probably won't be on the ballot, but other guys that deserve it, I'm definitely going to give, their due credit. Next guy, Don Mattingly. I mean, a current manager for the Miami Marlins. He was once an incredible baseball player who played for the Yankees for many years, a 19th round draft pick, which is alarming he went that late, considering he was an MVP, he was a 6-time All-Star, he was a 9-time Gold Glover, and a batting champ. He had 6 straight years of batting above 300 and led the league in doubles and led the league in hits on different occasions. He was also an incredible RBI guy, where he had 4 straight years of 100-plus RBIs, and he had a career high in RBIs in 1985, where he had 145 runs batted in. As a 19th rounder, that's pretty late for someone who had this incredible of a career. He's now enjoyed a solid career as a manager, where he was the Dodgers manager from 2012 to 2015, and now he is the Marlins manager, so a very involved career in baseball, both as a player and a manager. He never won a World Series with the Yankees, which isn't something that is terribly common for former Yankees players, considering they've been such a winning franchise. He also holds the record for most Grand Slams in a season with 6. So some incredible hitting out of Mattingly. And he's been inducted into numerous Hall of Fames, such as the South Atlantic League Hall of Fame in the minors and the New York Penn League Hall of Fame, which is also in the minors. He never was inducted in the MLB Hall of Fame, though, after his eligibility ran out in 2015, and his Yankee career was often looked at as a bad timing kind of thing, with how the Yankees won the World Series the year before he arrived in the league, and then win again the year after he retired. So he just missed the cut, unfortunately. But regardless, a player that is often remembered for his stellar years in New York wearing pinstripes, and for a 19th rounder, not a half-bad career to have. So my next guy, who on this list, I think, and he's also another future Hall of Famer, another Hall of Famer already, and another guy that definitely went very late, later than I think a lot of people would probably guess. Ryne Sandberg, a future Hall of Famer that made the big leagues as a 20th round pick and in the 1978 draft by the Philadelphia Phillies. Although he was drafted by the Phillies, he only spent 1 season with them. He played in only 13 games before getting traded ultimately to the Cubs, where the Hall of Fame career truly began for Sandberg. He was never much of a big power guy. I mean, with only 2 seasons with being, 30-plus home run outings, and then out of the 16 years that he played also, a very small percentage of the time he spent in the MLB was spent, hitting long balls. He did belt 40 homers and knocked in 100 RBIs one year in the 1990 season, which was one of 2 seasons where he had at least 100 RBIs, the second one coming a year later in 1991. Now, Sandberg was a very consistent hitter with a lifetime batting average of .285. He consistently hovered around .290, .300 for the most part, and was an exceptional hitter, leading the NL on 3 separate occasions in hits for a season. He was also elected into the Hall of Fame, despite being known as a slow starter in the early part of the season usually. He always seemed to turn things around at the right time. Going from an unknown 20th round draft pick to being in the Hall of Fame, that's an incredible turnaround for Sandberg, if you ask me. I mean, a very storied, career and a great kind of turn of events for him, going from 20th round unknown player to now in the Hall of Fame. Next guy I want to talk about, Mark Buehrle, another really late round draft pick that wound up having an incredible career. I mean, again, probably not quite a Hall of Fame career, probably just underneath it, but still just a memorable career, something that must be, made note of. Talk about a guy that was nearly forgotten in the draft. I mean, Buehrle was a late round draft pick, being selected in the 38th round of the draft by the Chicago White Sox. And with baseball shrinking their draft size again to 5 rounds instead of 38, it's clear that a lot of these Hall of Famers and true greats of the game, they would have never had a chance in baseball in these days. If you think about it, it's pretty crazy. He started his career with a 4-1 record after the 2000 season. But those totals skyrocketed the next year, with him winning 16-plus games in 3 of the next 4 seasons he played. In 2004 and 2005, he led the majors in starts with 35 and innings pitched with 245 in third innings. So a steady pitcher that was able to go the distance and had a knack for staying healthy and, being able to keep, good durability with him and great stamina, great conditioning all throughout the season. but he was also an exceptional fielder. I remember there was this very famous play that happened. I can't remember what exactly happened, but it was a slow roller down the first base line. And Burley charged it. I believe he either flipped the ball behind his back, which was still in his glove, and was able to get the runner out at first, or something happened where he kind of a fancy flip behind the back over to the first baseman, which is a pretty incredible, thing to do. Not only the timing, but the coordination to do that as well. In White Sox history, he reigned supreme on the mound, being 5th all-time in strikeouts, 6th in games started, and 8th in wins and also innings pitched. So someone who clearly left his mark on White Sox baseball. His career was also highlighted by a no-hitter in 2007 and a perfect game in 2009, which is pretty incredible to do, and he's only the 3rd player in MLB history to have registered a perfect game, no-hitter, and a World Series title all with the same team. The others being Cy Young and Sandy Koufax, so some very elite company he is with. I'm not quite sure, if he'll make the Hall of Fame, but he is very close to being that good of a pitcher and going down as one of the top throwers in really all of, Chicago White Sox history. Regardless of whether or not he makes it or not, his incredible career was probably not what he expected, being taken in the second to last round of the draft, as the 38th round pick. So my last player that I want to discuss, that I want to talk about, that really had an interesting career and a kind of an interesting turn of events in his, and also has a very interesting fact about him, Keith Hernandez. Now, Hernandez wouldn't have even made the majors in the draft 5 years ago, since he was a 42nd round draft pick. Yes, 42nd round. It took for a 5-time All-Star and 11 Gold Glover to make a big league. 42 rounds. That's how long it took for him to eventually get drafted. Drafted by the St. Louis Cardinals in the 42nd round, Hernandez had a slow rise to stardom while in St. Louis, and he also had his first 90-plus RBI season didn't come until the 1977 season, so a couple years it took him to get into a kind of a groove, and then his first 100-plus RBI season didn't occur until the 1979 season, so many years after him being drafted. He led the NL in hits in back-to-back years in 1979 and 1980. In both years, he was an All-Star, and in 1979, he won the MVP as well, after batting a league-high .344 from the plate, and he had his 100-plus RBI season as well. Over his 16 years in the majors, he finished with a .296 average and with over 2,000 hits. He was also known for his fielding, but his contact hitting is what really reigned supreme and kind of stuck out about his game, with being a 31% above the league average hitter in hitting production when he was, playing over his career. So a consistent player year in and year out. His year that he won the MVP was the only time, actually, in baseball history, fun fact here, where an MVP award was shared by 2 players in the same division, or in the same league, the other being Willie Stargell. So in 1979, that was the only year that a co-MVP was awarded in the NL, and it was between Keith Hernandez and none other than Willie Stargell. A career that was highlighted by exceptional fielding and constant hitting. Hernandez did everything and more as a player and really made the most out of being a late round draft pick. So a lot of really great players that went late in the draft many years ago, and even today. Kevin Kiermaier, he was a really late round draft pick as well, and he's playing in the World Series right now. So just because they were late round draft picks doesn't necessarily mean they weren't cut out for this line of business and for playing at the professional level of baseball. So that'll wrap it up for us here today. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice little review that really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we'd much appreciate that, especially with the World Series in full swing. We always want to keep you all clued into what's going on in the series. And as always, everyone, thanks so much for joining. And until next time, have a fantastic day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.